Ahoy, BookTube, and welcome to Two If by Sea. This is an ongoing literary event that Mark at Richardson Reads and I are doing, where we turn our attention to the vast body of nautical literature and highlight some things, spotlight things, alternating between fiction and nonfiction, month by month. And it seemed like a great idea when we thought it up on a back road in Vermont somewhere, and it still does seem like a great idea. But the more I think about it, especially now that we embark on month number 2, the more I realize that this is an enormous undertaking. Just enormous. Mark and I originally thought it up because I think it's safe to say that he and I have spent more time at sea than any other booktubers. In vastly different capacities, but still, both. I think you'd safely say we both have it in our blood. But the more I look at the vastness of what's out there, the more I think that any idea that we might have originally had of doing this in 1 year has to go out the bilge hole. we have to keep doing this forever. So the next time Frida and I go up to the little farmhouse in Vermont, I will do my best to get Mark tipsy and then to get him to commit to doing this forever on a perpetual basis. It won't be easy to do. He's a bit of a teetotaler, but I'll try. And this time around, it's nonfiction, and that, of course, oh God, it's just an unending amount. I have a volume in mind. I am going to call it nonfiction because it is not a single work of literature. It is an anthology. Because humans have written more about the ocean than they have about any other subject. You might think, no, more books have been written about Jesus, or more books have been written about love, and that is not true. Humans have been writing about the ocean long before they were writing about anything else, and they've written more about the ocean than they have about anything else. And invariably, once the printing presses got all fired up and running, and once books became easy to make, anthologies of sea writing started to proliferate. And there are quite a few of them now. And I'm sure that Mark is going to get to some of them, and I am too. And for my nonfiction debut here of Two If by Sea, I want to talk about one of those anthologies. It's old. It's from the 1950s. So it's not in print anymore. You'd have to find it maybe for a penny online or at a garage sale or an attic sale or something like that. But it is well worth your time to find. It is wonderful. One of my favorite. I have probably 3 nautical anthologies that I think are just required. You just have to have them. And this is one of them. Probably my favorite of them all. Maybe in part because of how gorgeously it's designed. This was made by Appleton Century Crofts, and it was edited by A.C. Spektorsky, and it's called The Book of the Sea. Then you have the classic Japanese print there, and that's all it is. There's no folderol on the cover. And this is Spektorsky's anthology of just the tiniest bucket dipped in the water of all the writings that have happened about the sea. It's a huge book. And in his introduction, he writes a little preface. And he says that he wants to avoid, that he's hoping to avoid, how does he put it here? Sheer size of the book was a mechanical limitation which ruled out many selections which might otherwise have been included. This seemed the lesser evil as opposed to making up a book of bits and samples. But he did end up making a book of bits and samples. Most of the stuff in this book is no longer than 3 pages. Quite a few are only 1 page. But at the end of his preface, Spektorsky writes, finally, a further word about man and the sea and this book. It is by means of boats that man has come to know the sea, and there is no handicraft which has been more lovingly cultivated than the building of boats. Nor has anything else made for practical use aroused so much tenderness in its makers and users. Devoted care has gone into the making of this vessel, too. It is hoped that it will stand the test of rewarding reading. And that is wonderful, because Spektorsky had a deep love of the sea. He was an American. He was, despite his last name, and the last name isn't nearly as bad as his first name. So he was born in Paris to American parents who, for some reason, did not have their citizenship immediately revoked by the fact that they imposed on their child the first name, Auguste Comte. Unsurprisingly, Spektorski went by AC for most of his life, although his friends called him Spek. And he, when he was back in America, he spoke French for a long time as a child, but no one's perfect. and then when he got back to, when he started to come into young adulthood, went to school, went to Columbia, and studied physics. And he was working in a laboratory in Fairfield, Connecticut, when something happened to him. So when he sold an article to the New Yorker. But the full story is that an idea came to him while he was out and about on the water. And then when he was walking around after that, he thought a little more about it, and then he sat down at his typewriter and typed it out in 21 minutes and mailed it off to the New Yorker on a lark, and they took it. So it wasn't just that the New Yorker published something of his, it was also that he realized that this is something he liked to do, and that doesn't require backbreaking labor, let's put it that way. And like so many people, especially young people, 20-something people who get something published in the New Yorker, it was the making of him. It opened all sorts of doors for freelancing everywhere else, and it opened a door at the New Yorker. He became an associate editor at the New Yorker for years, and went on from there to editorial positions in lots of other places, all the while churning out an endless river of book reviews. He is another example of a writer who we're never going to get. There's never going to be an 800-page collection of his book reviews, and that's a terrible shame, because he knew how to turn a phrase. He knew how to make a neat moment in his prose. And that once you have that ability, it never fails you. Unless an editor tells you to drop it, you can't drop it. So his book reviews would still make good reading, and yet they are uncollected, and by now, probably 70 years later, they're probably uncollectible. You probably couldn't find them enough to fill a book, and that's a terrible shame. But in addition to writing book reviews, an endless stream of book reviews, constant book reviews, he also wrote all sorts of other stuff, all sorts of articles and leaders and think pieces is what we would call them now, for every major magazine that was publishing at the time. And also moved on to other things like editing. This is one of the books that he did. He also did the Book of the Earth. He did a bunch of other anthologies too. He really liked that. He had a very strong hand in what was chosen himself, because he was a very wide and omnivorous reader. But even when he was provided with lots of stuff by an editorial team, he loved dipping in. He loved writing about the selections. At one point in this, there's a paragraph, a single paragraph from James Boswell, where Boswell quotes Johnson, Dr. Johnson, as saying that the seagoing life is just wretched, that it's worse than anything. There's just the one paragraph from that. But in the preface to that one paragraph, Spektorski sounds off, saying that, well, as usual, Johnson was pontificating on something he knew nothing about. And as we see in our study of his life, often when he pontificated about something, gave a rote opinion about something, and then came to know it, he changed his mind. Maybe he would have changed his mind if he'd gotten to know the life of the sea instead of only complaining about it. And then you get to that point, that's like 100 pages into the book, and you realize, wait a minute, did this anthologist just spank Dr. Johnson? And that goes throughout. He's got a very sympathetic but tart opinion about almost everything that's in here. And oh my God, BookTube, the treasures that are in this book. Oh my God. Let me give you just a tiny hint. We could go through the table of contents for an hour. There are a couple of Icelandic sagas, for instance, including the Saga of Eric the Red, which we just did on Sagalong, another BookTube event. That's in here with a translation by Wildemar Stephenson that's better by far than the translation that I read by Gwyn Jones, and that has the poetry that's all throughout the Icelandic sagas. The poetry is actually really well done in the translation that's in here of Eric the Red. But you also get Thor Heyerdahl. You get a selection from Homer's Odyssey, it's translated by Samuel Butler. You get Captain Joshua Slocum, who's sailing alone around the world is excerpted, I think, twice in here. All sorts of other things. Selections from the journals of Captain Cook. There's Richard Henry Dana, 2 years before the mast. There's Rudyard Kipling, of course. Kenneth Roberts is in here. A little bit of a piece of his on fishing in Maine. Robert Louis Stevenson is in here, not once but twice, which is well-deserved. An author named Samuel Purchas, who's not known now. Purchas wrote a great, long series of books on naval adventures and naval figures and naval history. Tremendously good reading. Totally gone now. But he's in here. He's excerpted in here. Owen Chase, a large chunk of Owen Chase's book, Stove by a Whale, about the Essex that was attacked and sunk by a whale. It was the inspiration for Moby Dick. A large chunk of that is in here. There's a bit from Nicholas Montserrat's novel, The Cruel Sea, which, if you haven't read, you really should. In terms of nautical fiction, you really should. I have a feeling that Montserrat's name will be coming up again in 2 If by Sea. There's also, he breaks the book down into segments. Segment 1 is Men Venture on the Sea. 2 is Men Live and Work on the Sea. 3 is Men Against the Sea. That's disasters, shipwrecks, war. 4 is Men Study the Sea. And there's one by William Beebe. There's a selection by William Beebe, who was the first person to descend to unimaginable depths in a bathysphere. It was a naturalist, and Beebe wrote a ton of great books, absolutely fantastic books about his travels everywhere. But he also wrote a fantastic book on going deeper into the ocean than any person had ever gone before. Captain Cousteau is in here. Oh, God. Okay, then there's Men Fight on the Sea, and that has Frederick Marryat and a whole bunch of other figures detailing naval warfare, including a selection from an Icelandic saga by Snorri Sturluson, whose name has also come up on Sagalong. There are quotes from letters of Walter Raleigh and John Paul Jones, and Jack London, Henry David Thoreau, John Steinbeck. It's just an absolutely terrific anthology. And I don't know yet. I haven't really consulted with Mark. I don't think that either one of us really cares for 2 If by Sea. If the thing we're praising is readily available or not, we're really sort of looking at the whole body of work. And of course, a lot of the things that we talk about will be recommends, but you can't limit when it comes to the world of books, you can't limit yourself to talking only about the things that are readily available, or you leave out great treasures if you do that. So I don't know about him. I'm probably not going to bother much with whether or not you can just go to your local bookstore and get the thing I'm talking about. It will often be the case in some variation or another. This thing is not in your local bookstore. It might be in your library, but I doubt it. I doubt it very much. But a used bookstore? Maybe. Could happen. And boy, oh boy, do I recommend it. This was... Spektorski did a lot of things in his life. He was an editor. He was a publisher for Playboy. He had a literary finger in a lot of pies, worked for Hollywood in just the position that you would want him to work in. He was a hack at a manual typewriter. He could do, 5,000, 6,000 words a day without really breaking a sweat. He loved doing it. He loved doing it, sitting at the typewriter and just writing prose that was finished virtually from the minute it left his machine. And with a person like that, you might think that the job they would get in Hollywood would be the soulless one, the one that sucks the soul right out of you, which is to write screenplays or doctor them, which has been the downfall of many a good writer, including in the present day. But no, he had a much better role. He was in charge of the story division at his studio, where he picked likely candidates for adaptation to film, for which you need not only a wide reading, your own personal reading has to be enormously wide in order to do that, but you also need an instinct for the dramatic. And that instinct for the dramatic never fails him in his writing. If you find any book by him, it doesn't have to be this one, but this is my pick for 2 If by Sea today. If you find any book that's edited or written by this author, you really need to get it, because he's worth making your acquaintance. He was a wonderful, urbane, chatty, finished guy. Spoke in paragraphs. And when it was all over, when he finally grew old, put down his pen, couldn't really churn out things anymore, he was buried at sea, which is just what he would have wanted. And that's it. That is my 2 If by Sea this time around, The Book of the Sea, by A.C. Spektorsky, because it's worth showing this on BookTube. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who's ever held this book up on BookTube. I wanted to do that. I will leave a link down below to Mark's video for today as well. And once this double blast is over, we'll be back next month with more nautical stuff. Thank you, BookTube.